swapping that getaway car for a commercial airliner.
Which is just wild to even picture.
It really is. And instead of disappearing into a maze of city streets, imagine a pitch-black, freezing drop into the absolute unknown. Picture this. It's Thanksgiving Eve, 1971.
Setting the scene.
A man in a dark business suit and a trench coat steps onto the aft stairs of a Boeing 727, and this plane is flying at 10,000 feet. Below him is just this freezing, rain-swept wilderness in the Pacific Northwest.
Just brutal conditions.
Yeah, and he steps off into the void with $200,000 strapped to his body. And then he simply vanishes.
I mean, it sounds exactly like the climax of a Hollywood thriller, you know? The brilliant rogue outsmarting the authorities, the daring leap into the storm.
Totally.
But the reality is far more compelling because the physics, the psychology, and just the absolute audacity of it actually happened. And it left behind a trail of physical evidence that is, frankly, as meticulous as it is completely baffling.
Yeah, and to figure out how a ghost basically steps out of a 727, we're pulling apart decades of material for this deep dive.
So much material.
Mountains of it. We've got the FBI's own declassified 66-volume case files, comprehensive historical breakdowns from Wikipedia, investigative reports from The Guardian and People magazine, archival material from the History Channel, and some really detailed notes from a dedicated Netflix documentary series.
So lots to go through.
It is. But we are going to synthesize all of this to explore the anatomy of the crime, the incredibly strange physical evidence left behind, the massive cultural phenomenon it sparked. And this is the crazy part, the explosive new theories from recent years that claim to finally identify the man who fell from the sky. Okay, let's unpack this.
As we dig into those files, I think it's crucial to look past the sensationalism of, the falling man.
Right.
Because the real fascination lies in the meticulous details leading up to that jump. We are looking at the psychological profile of a man who managed to exploit the highly specific aeronautical capabilities of a commercial jet.
Yeah, to execute a complex extortion plot in a confined space.
Exactly, and then just vanish. If you look at the evidence, the flight paths, the specific demands, the weather conditions, you start to see a picture not just of a crime, but of a highly calculated puzzle.
Engineered by someone who really understood the precise limitations of both human psychology and aviation technology.
Precisely.
So just imagine the backdrop changing right now for you to, like a 1970s aviation star chart overlaid with the dense, unforgiving pine forests of the Pacific Northwest.
It's November 24th, 1971.
Portland International Airport. And I think we have to remember, the security landscape of 1971 aviation is entirely foreign to what we know today, right?
Oh, completely different world, no metal detectors.
None. No TSA agents asking you to take off your shoes. You could literally walk into an airport, hand over some cash, and walk right onto a tarmac.
Which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, so a man walks up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He's white, mid-40s, wearing a dark business suit, a white shirt, a thin black clip-on tie, a black raincoat, and brown slip-on shoes.
Very nondescript.
Very. He uses $20 in cash to buy a one-way ticket for Flight 305, which is just a short, 30-minute hop north to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. And he gives his name as Dan Cooper.
Which is a fundamental detail that often gets lost in the mythology, by the way.
Right, the whole D.B. Cooper thing.
Yeah, he never called himself D.B. Cooper. That was actually a mistake made by a reporter named James Long, who was rushing to meet a frantic newspaper deadline.
Ah, the classic deadline scramble.
Exactly. The reporter checked on a local Portland man with a minor police record named D.B. Cooper, who was briefly questioned by authorities and entirely cleared.
Just a total coincidence.
Right. But the name D.B. Cooper went out on the wire service, other media outlets picked it up, and the moniker became etched into history. But the hijacker's actual alias for the ticket, the name he spoke at the counter, was Dan Cooper.
So Dan Cooper boards the plane, a Boeing 727-100. He's carrying a black attaché case and a brown paper bag. He takes seat 18E.
Which is the absolute last row of the plane.
The very back. He settles in and he orders a drink, a bourbon and 7-Up. He pays for it in cash, and the plane takes off right on schedule at 2:50 p.m. There are 36 passengers and a crew of 6.
Pretty light flight.
Yeah, and shortly after takeoff, Cooper hands a note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She's sitting in the jump seat right behind him. Now imagine you're Florence Schaffner. You're a young flight attendant in the 1970s, a time when the industry heavily marketed the glamour of the cabin crew.
She's assumed he was hitting on her.
Exactly. She assumes this guy is just another lonely businessman slipping her a hotel room key or a phone number. So she ignores it. She drops the note unopened into her purse.
But Cooper doesn't let that slide.
No, he does not.
He leans in toward her and whispers, very calmly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb."
Oh, man.
And the delivery of that line is critical to the FBI's later profiling of him. There was no shouting, no jumping up to grab a hostage.
Right.
It was an incredibly measured, almost polite assertion of total control.
Which means Schaffner's perspective is instantly, violently shifted. You go from expecting a cheesy pickup line to staring at a detonator.
A terrifying pivot.
So she opens the note. It's written in neat, all-capital letters with a felt-tip pen. It says, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." She sits down and, pushing through what must have been just paralyzing fear, asks to see the bomb to verify the threat.
A very brave thing to do in that moment.
Incredibly brave. So Cooper pops open his briefcase. Inside, Schaffner sees a large cylindrical battery attached with wires to 2 rows of 4 red cylinders. She immediately assumes it's dynamite.
It's a completely natural assumption under extreme duress, but it's really worth pausing on the physical description of that bomb.
Okay, why?
Well, when the FBI later analyzed her specific description, they pointed out a glaring inconsistency. Commercial dynamite is typically wrapped in brown or beige paper, not red.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's essentially sawdust soaked in nitroglycerin. The red cylinders she described, complete with a waxy coating she later recalled, were very likely common highway or railroad flares.
Wait, flares? So it might have been a fake bomb.
Potentially. But the genius of the device, whether it was real or a hoax, was the psychological leverage. In that confined, terrifying moment, Schaffner had no way of analyzing the chemical composition of the cylinders.
Obviously not.
The battery and the wires sold the threat. To the crew, it was a live, lethal explosive, and they had to treat it as such.
Right, you can't take that chance. So with that psychological leverage secured, Cooper pivots to his demands. He closes the briefcase and tells her exactly what he wants. He asks for $200,000 in negotiable American currency delivered to him in a knapsack by 5:00 p.m.
A very specific timeline.
But it's the next demand that really sets this apart from a standard robbery. He demands 4 parachutes, 2 front reserve chutes, and 2 back main chutes.
What's fascinating here is that this is where the profile of a meticulous planner really begins to crystallize.
Because he asked for more than one?
Exactly. Why 4 parachutes? It wasn't because he was a novice who didn't know how many he needed. By asking for multiple sets, Cooper was establishing a brilliantly cruel, mutual assured destruction pact with the authorities on the ground.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
He was heavily implying that he planned to take hostages, likely the flight attendants, with him when he jumped. This guaranteed that the FBI wouldn't supply him with sabotaged or non-functional parachutes. If the authorities gave him a parachute with cut lines, they risked killing an innocent civilian. It forced the government to provide him with perfectly functioning escape gear.
That is incredibly calculating. So Schaffner takes his demands directly to the cockpit. The pilot, Captain William Scott, contacts Seattle Air Traffic Control, who immediately loop in the FBI and the Seattle police.
And the airline executives.
Right. The president of Northwest Airlines, Donald Nyrop, is contacted. He authorizes the ransom payment and tells the crew to fully cooperate, prioritizing the lives of the passengers over the aircraft or the money.
A good call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because they need time to assemble the cash and the parachutes, the plane enters a holding pattern. For 2 grueling hours, Flight 305 just circles Puget Sound, burning fuel, while the authorities scramble on the ground.
And during this 2-hour holding pattern, we get a fascinating, sustained look at Cooper's demeanor.
Because he wasn't freaking out, right?
Not at all. He wasn't manic. He wasn't sweating, pacing, or shouting demands. Another flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, came to sit with him to act as a primary liaison between Cooper and the cockpit. She later described him to investigators as not nervous, rather nice, and entirely devoid of cruelty.
Devoid of cruelty, while holding a plane hostage.
Exactly. He even offered to pay for his bourbon and later tried to tip the flight attendants with his own pocket money.
Wait, he tried to tip them?
Yeah, which they declined because it was against company policy.
That is surreal. He's sitting there with what everyone believes is a live bomb, and he's trying to tip the staff.
Just a totally bizarre interaction.
And he's casually looking out the window, chatting with Mucklow. He recognizes the terrain below, pointing out the city of Tacoma. When Mucklow tells him the parachutes are being sourced from McChord Air Force Base, he correctly notes that McChord is only a 20-minute drive from the Seattle airport.
He knew the area.
He really did. But there is one bizarre moment that cracks this calm facade. There's an unidentified passenger wearing a cowboy hat.
Right, the cowboy.
Yeah, he gets annoyed by the delay. Remember, the passengers in the cabin haven't been told about the hijacking. They were just told there was a minor mechanical difficulty.
Blissfully unaware.
Exactly. So this cowboy walks back toward the rear of the plane, right toward Cooper, to complain to Mucklow. Cooper gets noticeably irritated. He glares at the man. He thinks this cowboy might be an undercover sky marshal probing his defenses.
He gets paranoid.
Yeah, Mucklow has to desperately reassure Cooper that there are no marshals on board, and another passenger eventually talks the cowboy into sitting back down.
That interaction, as brief as it was, adds an unpredictable variable to his psychological profile.
How so?
Well, the FBI profilers initially concluded that Cooper was a careful, procedure-oriented planner. He wasn't impulsive. His vocabulary, his anticipation of contingencies, his geographic knowledge of the Seattle-Tacoma area, and his choice to sit in the absolute last row seat 18E to monitor the entire cabin and prevent anyone from sneaking up behind him. All of that pointed to a methodical, tactical nature.
Right, like playing a high-stakes poker game at 10,000 feet. But I have a pushback here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Holding the plane hostage was only half the puzzle. We have to look at the forensics he left behind in that seat. If Cooper was such a brilliant, careful mastermind, why did he order a drink in a glass knowing perfectly well it would leave fingerprints?
That's a great question.
And why did he leave his clip-on tie on the seat later? And why let his guard down to get visibly annoyed by some random guy in a cowboy hat? Like, if you were pulling off the heist of the century, aren't you a little more locked into your operational security?
It's a contradiction that drove the FBI agents working the case absolutely crazy for decades.
I bet.
The fingerprint issue is particularly glaring. We know he was conscious of leaving evidence in other regards. For example, he was careful about returning notes. He made Mucklow give back the written bomb threat after she showed it to the captain.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he even made her return a paper matchbook she'd used to light his cigarette.
What?
He didn't want his handwriting or anything he touched left behind.
Oh, wow.
Yet he left the drink glass, the tie, and the tie clip. This suggests that while he was tactically prepared regarding the aircraft mechanics and the extortion strategy, he was a total amateur when it came to basic criminal forensics.
That's wild.
Yeah, he understood airplanes deeply, but he didn't necessarily understand how a crime scene is processed.
So the aviation knowledge was solid, but the criminal polish was severely lacking. Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the getaway.
Right, the drop.
The plane finally lands at Seattle-Tacoma Airport at 5:46 p.m. on a dimly lit runway. The authorities have the money ready, and the FBI didn't just hand over a neat little Hollywood briefcase. They handed over a 19-pound anchor of cash.
A lot of physical weight.
10,000 $20 bills. Cooper specifically requested 20s, likely because they are easy to spend without drawing suspicion, unlike $100 bills, but large enough to hit his $200,000 target without being impossible to carry. But the FBI, operating in this frantic rush, photographed all 10,000 bills on microfilm to record the serial numbers. Every single one of those bills started with the letter L, indicating they were issued by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. They essentially gave themselves 10,000 tiny tracking devices.
They also brought the 4 parachutes. But they didn't get them from the military, as Cooper had guessed.
Where did they get them?
The Seattle police sourced the 2 front reserve chutes from an Issaquah skydiving school and the 2 back main chutes from a local stunt pilot.
Just civilian gear.
Exactly. And a Northwest operations manager, wearing civilian clothes so Cooper wouldn't mistake him for an armed police officer and trigger the bomb, brings the heavy canvas bag of cash and the parachutes to the plane.
So Mucklow brings the bag of cash and the parachutes aboard. True to his word, once the delivery is confirmed, Cooper lets all 36 passengers go, along with 2 of the flight attendants.
Kept his end of the bargain.
Yeah, it's just Cooper, Mucklow, and the 3 guys in the cockpit remaining. But then there's a problem with the refueling trucks. A vapor lock in the pumping mechanism causes a significant delay, and Cooper starts to lose that icy calm.
He starts getting antsy.
He gets impatient, telling the crew to get the show on the road. He also complains they brought the money in a bulky cloth bag instead of the knapsack he specifically asked for.
Which forced him to improvise.
Exactly. He takes his pocket knife, cuts the nylon canopy entirely out of one of the front reserve parachutes, and stuffs the bundles of cash into the now empty parachute container, using the straps to secure it around his waist.
Just gutting the parachute to make a bag. And once they are finally fueled up, Cooper delivers his incredibly specific flight plan to the cockpit.
This is the part that amazes me.
He tells the pilots to fly a southeast course toward Mexico City, but he sets very strict aerodynamic parameters. He demands they fly at the absolute minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft. For a 727, that is roughly 100 knots, or about 115 miles per hour.
Which is crawling for a jet.
Barely moving. He demands they stay at or below 10,000 feet, which is incredibly low for a commercial jet. He tells them to keep the landing gear down and locked, lower the wing flaps to exactly 15 degrees, and leave the cabin unpressurized.
The pilots run the math and tell him that flying low, slow, with the gear down creating massive drag, is going to burn jet fuel so fast that they will never make it to Mexico City. They have to negotiate a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada.
Which he agrees to.
And then Cooper makes his most crucial demand, the linchpin of the entire operation. He wants the rear air stair, the passenger steps that drop down from the tail of the plane, deployed during takeoff.
The aft stairs.
The airline vehemently objects, saying it's not safe to take off with the stairs dragging. Cooper argues it can be done, do it, but eventually compromises, saying he will lower the stairs himself once they are safely in the air.
If we break down the mechanics of these aeronautical demands, it becomes clear that Cooper possessed highly specialized knowledge.
Yeah, this isn't just the guy who reads planes magazines.
No, the Boeing 727-100 was uniquely suited, perhaps the only passenger jet in the world suited, for this exact crime. Because its three engines are mounted high up on the rear fuselage, the wings are completely clear.
Right.
This allowed Boeing to install massive, triple-slotted flaps on the trailing edge of the wings. When those flaps are lowered to the 15-degree setting Cooper requested, they generate an immense amount of lift.
Ah, so that's how it stays in the air.
Yes, which physically allows the plane to fly at that creeping 100-knot speed without the wings losing lift and the plane stalling out of the sky. Furthermore, flying unpressurized below 10,000 feet meant that when he opened the door, there wouldn't be a violent, explosive decompression that would suck him out before he was ready.
And the rear stairs themselves, that's the real trick. Regular civilian commercial pilots didn't even know you could lower those stairs in mid-flight, did they?
Exactly. The aft air stair was controlled by a mechanical latch. Crucially, its operation could not be overridden or locked out from the cockpit.
Yeah.
If you turned the handle in the cabin, the heavy stairs would drop under their own weight, and the airflow would actually help push them down. This was a feature quietly utilized by the CIA during the Vietnam War.
The CIA, really?
Yes, they used 727s to drop intelligence agents and supplies into enemy territory precisely because you could fly slow and drop the stairs without the slipstream tearing them off. Civilian airline crews were not trained on this capability because there was absolutely no commercial reason to ever open the rear door of a passenger jet in mid-flight.
So the fact that he knew this.
Cooper's intimate knowledge of this secret feature strongly suggested to investigators that he had specialized military, intelligence, or aviation manufacturing background.
So around 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 takes off again from Seattle, heading south. Only this time they aren't alone in the sky. The Air Force has scrambled 2 F-106 fighter jets from McChord Air Force Base, plus a T-33 trainer jet.
An escort.
But intercepting a commercial airliner doing 100 knots is incredibly difficult for a fighter jet designed to go Mach 2. They are flying behind the 727 in the pitch dark, forced to do wide S patterns just to bleed off speed and stay behind the lumbering airliner without overshooting it.
Just weaving back and forth.
Yeah. Inside the cabin, Cooper tells Mucklow to go back and lower the rear stairs. She is terrified. The noise is deafening, the cabin is freezing, and she thinks if she unlatches that door, the pressure differential is going to suck her right out into the night.
She pleads with him.
Yeah.
She asks if she can tie herself to a seat with a rope or use some of the cut parachute cord as a safety line.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. Cooper looks at her and realizes she is simply too paralyzed by fear to help him. So he tells her to go to the cockpit, close the first-class curtain behind her, and under no circumstances come back. He says he will handle the stairs himself.
And before she leaves, she looks at the man who has held them captive for hours and begs, please, please take the bomb with you.
And he says he will.
He looks at her and tells her he will. As she walks away, she looks back over her shoulder and sees him tying the makeshift nylon money bag tightly around his waist. She walks into the cockpit, shuts the door, and that is the last time anyone on Earth ever sees Dan Cooper.
Up in the cockpit, the pilots are flying blind regarding the cabin. They see an instrument warning light flash around 8:00 p.m. This indicator tells them the rear door has been unlatched and the stairs are deployed.
Right.
Because the cabin is unpressurized, they feel a sudden pressure drop that pops their ears. The captain gets on the intercom and asks if Cooper needs help. He refuses. Then, at exactly 8:13 p.m., the pilots feel a sudden, sharp upward pitch in the tail of the aircraft.
Like the plane just bobbed up.
Exactly. The sudden release of Cooper's body weight from the very back of the plane changes the center of gravity, and the pilots have to physically wrestle the flight controls to push the nose down and return the plane to level flight.
He jumped. He actually walked down those dragging stairs and jumped into a freezing November Pacific Northwest storm. It was 15 degrees Fahrenheit out there with the wind chill.
Pitch black night. Raining heavily.
He's over a rugged, heavily wooded area of southwest Washington, somewhere near Mount St. Helens. He's wearing a trench coat, a business suit, and slip-on loafers. Loafers. The FBI initially thought he was a meticulous planner, but jumping into a freezing storm in loafers is like trying to leap onto a moving highway blindfolded. Doesn't this incredibly reckless, almost suicidal jump completely contradict the profile of a careful mastermind? Like, a calculated planner doesn't jump into a freezing void with zero visibility and absolutely no ground support waiting for him.
That paradox is the beating heart of the D.B. Cooper mystery. It severely divided the FBI agents working the case.
I can imagine.
Larry Carr, who directed the investigative team years later, firmly believed that absolutely no experienced paratrooper would ever make that jump. It was too risky, the meteorological conditions were too severe, the terrain was deadly, and he wasn't wearing proper gear.
No helmet, nothing.
No helmet, no jump boots, no survival gear. Carr theorized that Cooper was perhaps an Air Force cargo loader, someone who knew the mechanics of the planes, knew how to dispatch heavy items mid-flight, and had basic parachute familiarity, but wholly lacked the advanced survival skills of a true skydiver.
That makes sense.
On the other hand, Earl Causey, the stud pilot who packed the main parachutes Cooper used, testified that anyone with just a handful of practice jumps could pull the ripcord and survive the descent. But surviving the landing in that dense forest canopy, in the dark, in loafers, that is where the meticulous plan shatters against the brutal reality of nature.
Which brings us to the aftermath and the physical evidence. The plane continues on and lands safely in Reno, Nevada at 11:02 p.m., with the rear stairs still deployed and dragging sparks along the runway.
Just a crazy visual.
The cabin is empty. The bomb squad sweeps the plane and finds no explosives. And the FBI launches what becomes an unprecedented, massive manhunt along the flight path, a corridor they designated as Vector 23.
The sheer scale of this search operation cannot be overstated. They didn't just have guys walking through the woods with flashlights.
What did they do?
The FBI authorized the use of an SR-71 Blackbird.
You mean the spy plane?
Yes. This is a supersonic, high-altitude stealth reconnaissance aircraft capable of flying Mach 3. They used it to photograph the entire flight path using high-resolution infrared cameras looking for the heat signature of a campfire or a body.
That is insane.
And it gets wilder. To calculate where he might have drifted in the wind, they took a 200-pound sled, roughly the weight of Cooper and the money, and literally shoved it out the back of another 727 flying at the exact same speed and altitude over the same area.
Just dropping a sled into the woods.
Yes. When those drift calculations suggested he might have landed near or in Lake Merwin, a large reservoir in Washington, they didn't just send divers. They brought in a commercial marine salvage firm equipped with a submarine.
Wait, a submarine in a lake?
A submarine. They used sonar to scour the 200-foot depths of the lake, dealing with freezing thermoclines and zero visibility, looking for a drowned man anchored by 19 pounds of cash.
That is just a staggering level of resources. But despite the Blackbird, the sled drops, the submarine, and hundreds of soldiers combing the woods, they find absolutely nothing. No parachute, no trench coat, no buddy.
Completely vanished.
But back on the plane in Reno, they do find clues, and this is where the forensic science gets really granular. They process seed 18E and the surrounding area. They lift 66 unidentified fingerprints. They find his black JCPenney clip-on tie left on the seat and a mother-of-pearl tie clip.
Right, the tie is key.
They find a single strand of hair on his headrest, and in his ashtray, they find 8 Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette butts. Now, You would think this is a forensic goldmine, right? DNA, fingerprints, hair. The case should be closed.
You would think so, especially with modern technology. But the handling of that evidence over the decades is a tragic comedy of errors.
Oh, no.
When the FBI's DNA unit eventually evolved to the point where they wanted to extract profiles from the saliva on those 8 cigarette butts, they discovered a catastrophic mistake.
Don't tell me they lost them.
The FBI's Las Vegas field office had accidentally destroyed the cigarette butts years earlier, doing a routine evidence purge, not realizing their significance.
You have got to be kidding me.
And the single hair sample found on the headrest. It was lost by the FBI crime lab somewhere around 2002.
Unbelievable.
So investigators were left heavily reliant on the fingerprints, which only offer a match if the suspect is already in the system, and the physical fabric of the tie.
And we have to talk about the parachutes, because the choices he made here paint a very weird picture. Cooper asked for 4 chutes. He left 2 behind on the plane. But the 2 he took with him into the night are the subject of massive debate. He jumped with a military-style main parachute that couldn't be steered. But for his backup, his reserve chute, he accidentally took a dummy training parachute.
Yes, and this is a critical detail. One of the front reserve chutes provided by the skydiving school was a classroom demonstration model. Its nylon canopy was literally sewn shut.
Sewn shut, so it wouldn't even open.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was designed so students could practice pulling the ripcord in a classroom without the canopy exploding out. Cooper used the other, functional reserve chute, the good one, to cut open and make his makeshift money back.
Oh, wow.
Meaning, when he jumped into the freezing night, the only backup parachute he had strapped to his chest was a sewn-shut dummy. If his main chute failed, pulling that reserve ripcord would do absolutely nothing.
The FBI looks at this and says, see, he's a complete amateur. No expert skydiver would ever fail to recognize a dummy parachute. It probably felt different, packed differently.
Which is a solid argument.
But then other experts argue, wait, he used the good reserve to carry the money. Maybe he knew the dummy was useless for jumping, but figured since he only needed one main chute, he could use the dummy's straps or the rigid container for utility, maybe to strap the money bag tighter to his body.
It remains heavily debated. If he didn't realize it was a dummy, it strongly supports the FBI's theory that he died on impact when his unsteerable main chute drifted into trees or failed to deploy properly.
Makes sense.
If he did know it was a dummy and took it anyway, it shows incredible nerve and an almost terrifying confidence in his main sheet. But as the parachute debate raged on, the most significant physical evidence actually came from that cheap JCPenney tie he left behind.
The citizen sleuth.
Yes. In 2009, a group of dedicated researchers known as the Citizen Sleuths got unprecedented access to the tie. They used scanning electron microscopy to analyze the microscopic particles trapped deep within the woven fabric.
I love the citizen sleuths part of this story. They put this tie under an electron microscope. And an electron microscope doesn't use light. It uses a beam of accelerated electrons to create incredibly high-resolution images of microscopic objects. It turns a piece of fabric into a forensic treasure map.
It really does.
They find lycopodium spores, which are highly specific plant spores used in the pharmaceutical industry to coat pills. But much more importantly, they find minute microscopic particles of unalloyed titanium, bismuth, antimony, cerium, and strontium sulfide.
And that chemical cocktail raises a massive question. Who was walking around in 1971 getting pure unalloyed titanium dust on their tie?
Probably not a lot of people.
Very few. During the early 1970s, unalloyed titanium was incredibly rare and difficult to manufacture. It wasn't used in everyday items. It was highly specialized, used almost exclusively in advanced aeronautical fabrication facilities or chemical plants that dealt with highly corrosive materials.
Interesting.
And the cerium and strontium sulfide they found were elements heavily used by factories manufacturing cathode ray tubes, like the bulky glass tubes inside 1970s televisions and military radar screens.
So the tie is essentially screaming, I work in a highly advanced manufacturing plant. Specifically, researchers pointed out that a Boeing contractor located in the Pacific Northwest named Remcrew Titanium Inc. handled these exact materials.
Which gave the FBI a huge lead.
Right, so the FBI adjusts their profile. They are looking for a guy who knows planes, knows metallurgy, understands cathode ray tubes, and maybe works in the Seattle or Portland aviation sector. But for 9 long years, checking employee rosters and interviewing plant managers, they find nothing.
A dead end.
Until 1980. 8-year-old Brian Ingram is on vacation with his family, camping on a beachfront on the Columbia River known as Tena Bar, just downstream from Vancouver, Washington. He's raking the wet sand to build a campfire, and his rake hits something soft.
A historic discovery.
He digs up 3 rotting, disintegrated bundles of cash. It's exactly $5,800. And when the FBI dries the bills out, the serial numbers match Cooper's microfilmed ransom money.
Finding that money at Tina Bar completely upended the entire investigation. It was the only confirmed physical evidence from the hijacking ever found outside the aircraft.
It was just sitting in the sand.
Yeah. The bundles were still held together by rubber bands, but the edges of the bills had disintegrated significantly.
Yeah.
Now, the location of Tina Bar is critical. It is geographically downstream from the Washougal River, which flows out of the rugged mountainous area where the FBI sled drops calculated Cooper most likely landed.
So the initial logical theory is Cooper lands in the woods, maybe he breaks his leg and dies, or maybe he's crossing the river and drops the heavy bag. The money falls into the Washougal River, and over the course of 9 years, it slowly floats downstream, eventually washing up on this sandy beach at Tina Bar. Case closed, right?
It seems so neat and tidy.
Except geologists and biologists look at the specific environment of this money and completely blow that theory apart.
Exactly. This is where the intersection of different scientific disciplines becomes fascinating. Geologist Leonard Palmer closely examined the sediment layers at Tina Bar. The Army Corps of Engineers had aggressively dredged that specific section of the river in 1974, pulling up clay from the riverbed and depositing it on the bank.
Okay, the dredging is key here.
Palmer found that the money was located in a layer of sand above that dredged clay. Mechanically, that means the money could not have been resting on that beach since 1971.
Wow.
It arrived on that specific layer of sand long after the 1974 dredging operation. Furthermore, incredibly advanced analysis conducted in 2020 looked at diatoms found embedded in the bills.
Okay, for those who haven't taken high school biology recently, diatoms are microscopic, single-celled algae with cell walls made of silica, essentially glass. They are everywhere in bodies of water, but specific species only bloom under specific conditions.
Precisely. And the specific species of diatoms found on Cooper's ransom money only bloom during the springtime warmer waters.
Springtime? Wait.
Remember, Cooper jumped in late November. The water was freezing. If the money had fallen into the river the night of the hijacking, it would be covered in winter diatoms.
Oh my goodness.
The presence of spring diatoms strongly indicates the money was not submerged in the river nor buried in wet sand at the time of the hijacking. It was kept dry somewhere and entered the water at least several months or perhaps years later during a spring flood.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If the money didn't get into the water until the spring, it destroys the FBI's working theory that he drowned in the river that very night. Does this biological evidence prove he survived the jump, hid the money somewhere dry, and then it got washed away later during a spring flood before he could retrieve it?
It's the ultimate cliffhanger.
It really is. But while the physical search stalled in the mud of the Columbia River, the cultural impact of his jump exploded across the country. You would think skyjacking a commercial airliner with a bomb is a rare, unthinkable crime. But Cooper essentially released a virus into the aviation world. In 1972, the single year following Cooper's jump, there were 15 similar extortion parachute hijackings.
It was an absolute epidemic. The security was so lax that anyone could try it. You had men like Richard LaPointe, who hijacked a plane over Nevada and jumped into the freezing Colorado snow wearing cowboy boots, of all things.
Cowboy boots.
Yeah. Frederick Hahnemann hijacked a flight in Pennsylvania, extorted over $300,000, and parachuted into the dense jungles of Honduras.
Jeez.
Martin McNally hijacked a plane out of St. Louis, but he lost his ransom money in the turbulent wind jumping over Indiana. The major defining difference between Cooper and these 15 copycats is that all 5 of the men who actually made the parachute jumps survived their landings, but every single one of them was eventually caught.
Wow.
Cooper was the only one who beat the odds in the manhunt.
And it forced the entire aviation industry to permanently change. The reason you take your shoes off at TSA, the reason you have your bags x-rayed, and the reason you walk through metal detectors all traces its roots back to the panic caused by D.B. Cooper.
It changed everything.
In 1973, universal bag searches were mandated. They installed peepholes in cockpit doors so the pilots could see what was happening in the cabin. But the most ingenious change was a mechanical invention called the Cooper vane. Boeing engineers designed a little aerodynamic wedge that sits on the outside fuselage of a 727 near the rear stairs.
The physical mechanism of the Cooper vane is brilliant in its simplicity. It's a spring-loaded paddle. When the plane is on the ground, the spring keeps the paddle out of the way. allowing the stairs to be opened normally.
Right.
But when the plane takes off, the immense force of the airflow pushing past the fuselage physically pushes that paddle backward, rotating it so it completely blocks the exterior handle of the stairs.
Oh, that's clever.
As long as the plane is flying, the wind pressure makes it mechanically impossible to unlatch the rear door. It physically solved the D.B. Cooper problem.
But the phenomenon wasn't just technical, it was deeply cultural. Almost immediately after the hijacking, letters claiming to be from the hijacker began arriving at newspaper offices across the country. The FBI ultimately received and processed at least 6 of these letters, which are detailed extensively in the History Channel archives.
Some of them were quite elaborate.
Yeah, some were constructed like classic ransom notes, cutting out letters from magazines like Playboy and newspapers like the Sacramento Bee.
Wow.
One letter mailed to the Portland Oregonian newspaper read, "Am alive and doing well in hometown. P.O. The system that beats the system."
Another letter, sent in March 1972, directly taunted the authorities. This letter is to let you know I am not dead, but really alive, and just back from the Bahamas, so your silly troopers up there can stop looking for me.
Yeah.
That is just how dumb this government is.
Taunting them.
It goes on to claim he was a very rich man now, and that he committed the crime not just for the money, but to relieve myself of frustration.
The FBI publicly dismissed most of these letters as cruel hoaxes perpetrated by pranksters. But they quietly kept the final 2 letters hidden from the public until the 2000s, suggesting that internally, they might have taken them much more seriously.
Which is very telling.
In fact, a modern investigative team, led by a documentary filmmaker named Thomas Colbert, heavily analyzed these letters. They claim to have found complex military codes embedded in the phrasing and numbers of the 5th and 6th letters. They argued the numbers decoded to the phrase, "I'm LT Robert W. Rackstraw," pointing to a specific, highly trained Vietnam veteran suspect.
The Rackstraw theory is huge in the lore.
But whether the letters were written by the real Cooper or just by bored people looking for attention, they represent what I would call a cultural hijacking.
That's the perfect term for it. The American public in the early 1970s was dealing with the immense disillusionment of the Vietnam War, political scandals, and a growing, deep-seated distrust of massive corporations and the government.
Right, the establishment.
They took this federal criminal who threatened to blow up a plane, and they turned him into an anti-establishment folk hero. There were hit country songs written about him. People wore T-shirts saying, "D.B. Cooper, where are you?"
It's crazy.
To this day, there are annual conventions in the Pacific Northwest, like CooperCon, where enthusiasts, authors, and armchair detectives gather to celebrate the mystery and share their theories.
But I have to push back on this Robin Hood myth. Why do we romanticize a guy who strapped a bomb to a commercial flight?
This is their point.
Is it just because he supposedly beat the system and stuck it to a faceless airline corporation?
Yeah.
When we treat him like a charming, victimless rogue, we are completely ignoring the absolute psychological terror he inflicted on Florence Schaffner, Tina Mucklow, and the flight crew.
They were traumatized.
That was a real bomb, or at least a very convincing fake that they had to treat as real, and real people sitting on that plane thought they were going to die in a fireball that Thanksgiving Eve.
You're absolutely right to highlight the trauma of the victims. The romanticism stems entirely from the appeal of the Phantom. Because he was never caught, he became a blank canvas. The public projects their own fantasies onto him, the brilliant rogue, the underdog who outsmarted the massive machinery of the FBI. If he had been caught shivering in the mud with a broken ankle the next morning, weeping and begging for help, there would be no songs about him. The mystery, the sheer void of his disappearance, is the fuel for the myth.
Which brings us to the final and maybe most exciting part of this deep dive, the lineup. Who is Dan Cooper?
A big question.
The FBI processed over 1,000 serious suspects over 45 years. But let's start with the name itself, Dan Cooper. Where did he get that alias?
This is one of the most intriguing, obscure clues in the entire case. Dan Cooper was not just a random generic name he pulled out of thin air. It was actually the title character of a popular French-language Belgian comic book series from the era.
A comic?
Yeah. The fictional character, Dan Cooper, was a Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot who took part in daring, adventurous aeronautical missions. In one specific issue, the characters even featured parachuting on the cover.
Oh, wait.
Because these specific comic books were not translated into English or widely imported to the United States, it suggested to investigators that the hijacker might have been Canadian, or perhaps an American military man who served a tour in Europe, read the comics there, and subconsciously used the name of his fictional hero when put on the spot at the ticket counter.
That is such a cool detail. So, armed with the comic book connection, the titanium tie, and the physical description, we get a wild carousel of suspects. First, you have Kenneth Christensen. He was an actual Northwest Airlines flight attendant.
An insider.
Yeah. He loved bourbon, he knew the 727 intimately, and he looked remarkably like the FBI composite sketch. But the FBI ultimately cleared him because he was too short and didn't match the physical build. Then you have William Smith. He was a railroad worker whose company went through a massive corporate bankruptcy, wiping out his pension. He had the metallurgical background to explain the titanium, and a massive motive to stick it to the transportation industry, but there was no direct physical evidence linking him to the plane.
And the suspect list gets even darker.
Oh.
You have Joe Lakich. He was a man whose daughter was tragically killed due to a botched, highly publicized FBI hostage negotiation years prior. This gave him a massive, burning grudge against the FBI, providing a motive to embarrass them on a national stage.
That's a strong motive.
Then you have the military men. Ted Braden was a highly decorated Special Forces commando and a master skydiver who deserted his unit in Vietnam. He had the exact skill set required to make that freezing jump and survive.
And Rackstraw. Right.
And of course, Robert Rackstraw, the ex-convict, helicopter pilot, and explosives expert who tried to fake his own death in an airplane crash and was the focus of the coded letters theory we talked about.
But I want to zero in on the prime focus of recent years. The suspect that seems to check almost every single box. Richard McCoy Jr.
Richard McCoy Jr. is arguably the most compelling suspect to ever emerge in the 50-year history of the case.
Really? Why?
Largely because his actual verifiable resume perfectly matches the anatomy of the crime. McCoy was an Army veteran who served 2 intense tours in Vietnam. During his first tour, he was a demolitions expert, which perfectly explains his ability to construct or fake a convincing bomb.
Okay, that fits.
During his second tour, he was a helicopter pilot, giving him advanced aviation knowledge. He was also an avid, highly experienced recreational skydiver. And most damning of all, 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, McCoy staged an almost identical copycat crime.
The copycat crime is staggering. On April 7, 1972, Richard McCoy boarded a United Airlines 727 out of Denver. He handed the flight attendant a note. He demanded 4 parachutes and $500,000.
Not familiar.
Exactly. After getting the money, he bailed out of the rear stairs over the dark mountains of Utah. He successfully landed and walked away. But unlike Cooper, McCoy was sloppy.
Very sloppy.
He was arrested 2 days later because he left a handwritten note and his literal fingerprints on a magazine he was reading on the plane. He was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in federal prison.
But McCoy was not a man who stayed put.
What did he do?
In 1974, he engineered a brazen escape from a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. He and a group of inmates commandeered a garbage truck and literally crashed it through the main gates of the prison.
A garbage truck?
Yeah. 3 months later, the FBI finally tracked him down to a safe house in Virginia. When agents approached, McCoy fired at them, and he was killed in the ensuing shootout. One of the FBI agents on the scene famously claimed later, "When I shot Richard McCoy, I shot D.B. Cooper at the same time."
Wow. But for decades, the FBI officially maintained that McCoy was not Cooper. They pointed to the physical description provided by the flight crew. McCoy was 29 years old at the time. Cooper was estimated to be in his mid-40s.
Right, a significant age gap.
McCoy had prominent, sticking-out ears, light blue eyes, and a severe, noticeable lisp due to a childhood cleft palate. Cooper was described as having brown eyes, no distinct accent or lisp, and average ears. Furthermore, the FBI had evidence placing McCoy at home in Utah with his family the day after the hijacking, having Thanksgiving dinner.
But the McCoy theory just got a massive explosive shot of adrenaline.
Oh yeah, the 2023 stuff.
In 2023 and 2024,
Yeah.
astonishing claims came out in The Guardian and People magazine. McCoy's children, Shantae and Rick, finally came forward to the press. They said they had kept quiet for 50 years to protect their mother, who they deeply believe aided their father in his crimes.
That's a long time to keep a secret.
But after their mother died in 2020, they began going through her belongings and revealed a massive secret. He found a heavily modified military surplus parachute rig hidden in their mother's shed in North Carolina.
They found a parachute in the shed. An aviation YouTuber and investigator named Dan Greider became involved. He physically examined the rig and called it a 1 in a billion match for the missing main parachute from the Cooper hijacking.
A 1 in a billion match.
The modifications on the straps matched what would be needed to carry a heavy load of cash. Grider claims he handed this parachute over directly to the FBI in late 2023, and that the Bureau is currently attempting to extract touched DNA from the canvas and straps to test against the partial DNA profile they managed to pull from the clip-on tie left on Flight 305.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if that DNA matches, it's game over. The greatest mystery in American aviation is solved.
Right.
But even without the DNA, the McCoy development highlights the danger of investigative bias. The FBI dismissed McCoy early on because he didn't perfectly match the composite sketch or the specific witness descriptions of his voice.
Which we know can be flawed.
Yes. Psychological studies show that witness memory is notoriously fallible, especially under the extreme prolonged stress of a bomb threat. People misremember eye color, age, and accents all the time when their brain is focused on survival. Furthermore, if McCoy was wearing theatrical makeup, a hairpiece, or intentionally altering his voice, as one of the taunting letters later claimed the hijacker did it, could easily explain all the physical discrepancies.
So what does this all mean? I have to challenge the McCoy theory one last time.
Go for it.
All three flight attendants, Schaffner, McLeod, and Alice Hancock, were shown photographs of Richard McCoy by the FBI shortly after he was arrested for his copycat crime. They all explicitly, without hesitation, said he was not the guy.
They were very firm on that.
They pointed out his nose was broader, his ears stuck out way too much. If you spend 5 grueling hours sitting directly next to a guy, talking to him, lighting his cigarettes, looking at his face while he holds a bomb, wouldn't you notice a severe lisp and prominent ears? Memory is fallible, yes, but prolonged exposure usually locks in major features.
Are we just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole because his kids found an old military parachute in a shed?
It's a completely fair and necessary challenge, and until that DNA test from the shed parachute comes back positive, McCoy remains just a theory.
Right.
A highly compelling, circumstantially heavy theory, but a theory nonetheless. The FBI officially suspended the active day-to-day investigation of D.B. Cooper in July 2016. They compiled that massive 66-volume case file over 45 years and finally decided their federal resources and manpower were better spent on modern threats.
Which makes sense.
They left the case open to the public, essentially handing the torch over to the citizen sleuths, the YouTubers, and the historians. And that brings us to the end of our journey today. We've gone from a quiet man ordering a bourbon on a routine 30-minute flight to a massive FBI manhunt utilizing supersonic spy planes and deep-water submarines.
Quite a ride.
We've explored the aerodynamics of 727 flaps, the unalloyed titanium particles trapped in a cheap JCPenney tie, encrypted letters sent to newspapers, rotting money found by an 8-year-old on a riverbank, and a parachute hidden in a North Carolina shed for half a century.
The true value of the D.B. Cooper mystery isn't just about finally matching a name to the composite sketch.
No. What is it?
It is a masterclass in how forensic science, investigative bias, and cultural myth-making all intersect. It shows how a single audacious event can permanently alter an entire global industry, changing airport security and the psychology of travel forever, while simultaneously capturing the imagination of a country desperately looking for an anti-hero.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the declassified files, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. Something we haven't touched on yet, but that haunts the margins of this case.
Oh, this is a good one.
The FBI spent years scouring the employee records of Boeing and its contractors, looking for a disgruntled aviation worker or a specialized metallurgist who matched Cooper's description. They largely operated under the assumption that he either died in the freezing woods that night or he successfully fled the country to live off his riches.
Right, the two main assumptions.
But if the hijacker truly was just a disgruntled local chemical worker who lost his pension and needed the money, how is it possible that a man with his exact face, his exact age, and this incredibly niche skill set never failed to show up for work the Monday after Thanksgiving in 1971?
It's chilling to think about the logistics of that Monday morning.
Did he survive the freezing jump, bury the money in the dirt, hitchhike home, and simply slip right back into his desk chair on Monday morning?
Just back to the daily grind.
Was he sitting there in the break room, drinking his coffee, watching the massive manhunt unfold on the evening news, while his colleagues were entirely oblivious that the phantom the entire world was looking for was sitting right next to them? A high-altitude heist, a trail of microscopic forensic clues, and a man who stepped out into the freezing rain and became a ghost.